there are also certain duties to be observed toward those who may have injured you. For there is a limit to revenge and punishment, nay, I know not whether it may not be enough for him who gave the provocation to repent of his wrongdoing, so that he may not do the like again, and that others may be the less disposed to do as he has done. In the public administration, also, the rights of war are to be held sacred, while there are two ways of contending, one by discussion, the other by force, the former belonging properly to man, the latter to beasts. Recourse must be had to the latter if there be no opportunity for employing the former. Wars, then, are to be waged in order to render it possible to live in peace without injury, but, victory once gained, those are to be spared who have not been cruel and inhuman in war, as our ancestors even admitted to citizenship the Tuscans, the Equi, the Volsci, the Sabines, the Hernici, while they utterly destroyed Carthage. I could wish that they had not destroyed Corinth, but I believe that they had some motive, especially the convenience of the place for hostile movements, the fear that the very situation might be an inducement to rebellion. Point 1. In my opinion, peace is always to be sought when it can be made on perfectly fair and honest conditions. In this matter, had my opinion been followed, we should now have, not indeed the best republic possible, but a republic of some sort, which is no longer ours. Still further, while those whom you conquer are to be kindly treated, those who, laying down their arms, take refuge in the good faith of the commander of the assailing army, ought to be received to quarter, even though the battering ram have already shaken their walls. In this respect justice used to be so carefully observed by our people, that by the custom of our ancestors those who received into allegiance states or nations subdued in war were their patrons. Indeed, the rights of war are prescribed with the most sacred care by the official law of the Roman people, from which it may be understood that no war is just unless after a formal demand of satisfaction for injury, or after an express declaration and proclamation of hostilities. Populius, as commander, held control of a province. A son of Cato served his first campaign in his army. When Populius saw fit to discharge one of the legions, he discharged also Cato's son, who served in that same legion. But when the youth remained in the army for love of military service, Cato wrote to Populius that if he permitted his son to stay, he must make him take a second oath of military duty, else, the term of the first oath having expired, he could not lawfully fight with the enemy. Thus there used to be the most scrupulous observance of the right in the conduct of war. There is, indeed, extant a letter of Marcus Cato the elder to his son Marcus, in which he writes that he has heard of his son's discharge by the consul, after service in Macedonia in the war with Perseus, and warns him not to go into battle, inasmuch as it is not right for one who is no longer a soldier to fight with the enemy. In this connection it occurs to my mind that in the early time the name denoting an enemy engaged in actual war was the word employed to denote a foreigner, the unpleasantness of the fact being thus relieved by the mildness of the term, for he whom we call a foreigner bore with our ancestors the appellation which we now give to an enemy. The laws of the 12 tables show this, as, for instance, a day assigned for trial with a foreigner, perpetual right of ownership as against a foreigner. What can more truly indicate gentleness 26 of spirit than calling him with whom you are at war by so mild a name? Yet time has made that word harsher, for it has ceased to denote a foreigner, and has retained, as properly belonging to it, its application to an adversary in arms. Even when there is a contest for power, and fame is sought in war, there ought still to underlie the conflict the same grounds that I have named above as just causes for war. But the wars waged for superiority in honor or in dominion should be conducted with less bitterness of feeling than where there are actual wrongs to be redressed. For as we contend with a fellow citizen in one way if he is an enemy, in a very different way if he is a rival, the contest with the latter being for honor and promotion, with the former for life and reputation, so our wars with the Celtivari and the Cimbri were waged as with enemies, to determine not which should come off conqueror, but which should survive, while with the Latins, the Sabines, the Samnites, the Carthaginians, Pyrrhus. The contest was for superiority. The Carthaginians, indeed, violated their treaties. Hannibal was cruel, the others were more worthy of confidence. Indeed, what Pyrrhus said about restoring the captives of war is admirable. I ask that you should give no gold, no price. In war I ply no trade but sword, with steel, and not with gold, stake we our lives. Wills queenly fortune you or I should rule. Try we by might, and bear this message with you, for those whose prowess fortune spared in battle, freedom is also spared by my decree. Lead them away, gods approve. A sentiment truly royal, and worthy of the race of the Aeacidae. Still further, if any person, induced by stress of circumstances, makes a promise to a public enemy, good faith must be observed in keeping such a promise. Thus Regulus, in the First Punic War, taken captive by the Carthaginians, sent to Rome to negotiate an exchange of prisoners, and bound by an oath to return, in the first place, on his arrival, gave his opinion in the Senate that the prisoners should not be sent back, and then, when his kindred and friends tried to retain him, preferred returning to punishment to breaking his faith with the enemy. But in the Second Punic War, after the Battle of Cannae, the 10 men whom Hannibal sent to Rome bound by an oath that they would return unless they obtained the redemption of the prisoners of war, were all disfranchised one by the censors, because they had perjured themselves. Nor did that one of the 10 escape who had incurred guilt by the fraudulent performance of his oath. He, having been suffered by Hannibal to leave the camp, returned shortly afterward, saying that he had forgotten something. Then going out again from the camp, he imagined himself acquitted of his oath, and he was so in words alone, not in fact. But in a promise, what you mean, not what you say, is always to be taken into account. The most illustrious example of justice toward an enemy was presented by our ancestors, when the Senate and Caius Fabricius sent back to Pyrrhus a deserter who promised the Senate to kill the king by poison. Thus they refused to sanction the murder of an enemy, and a powerful one, and one who was making war on them without provocation. Enough has now been said about duties connected with war.